Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my mid-month May 2025 AM reading update. I'm pushing the envelope as usual about what I can call mid-month, but I think I'm somewhat in the neighborhood still. Let's hope I get this posted quickly enough. As usual, the week does seem to get away from me, and in fact, I have to get ready for a doctor's appointment soon, but I thought I'd share things quickly. This is my first technical AM reading video of May, in fact, where I'm talking only about books I've started in May. And as such, I've also posted finally my April literary newsletter. Every month I post this literary newsletter to my blog where I have snippets of the book reviews for the books I read that month. I have a bunch of literary news that caught my interest. I have a book pick, a book quote, etc. It's all listed down below. Another thing I do in all of my AM reading videos is that I read a short story from a collection. I go through literary journals, and in fact, I'm just starting a new one for May. This is the Cincinnati Review. It's the fall 2024 edition, and the first fiction story listed in here, I'm reading off the table of contents, even though I just read it, is The Theft by Rebecca Bernard. And this is a longer short story, and it's an interesting conceit. Like, you start with the sentence to draw you in, and it's about a theft, and about how the narrator's the only one home at the time. And then we go back into the past, and this is a very interior, ruminative man. We understand that he is a middle-aged man living in the suburbs in Maryland. It's relatively safe, which I guess is supposed to set the scene about what type of burglars these are ultimately. And he lives with his wife and his daughter, but his wife is out of town on a business trip, and his daughter decides to stay with friends when his wife isn't around. She says she's too lonely, and the father starts thinking about, well, I'm lonely too. There's reference to a son, and then ultimately we see the big tragedy of their family has nothing to do with this upcoming burglary. The son, some handful of years back, was playing with lighter fluid in the backyard, and he caught on fire, and just a really tragic, gruesome death. Well, he died of burns, I guess, 2 weeks later in the hospital. But anyway, and this is obviously something that weighs heavily probably on all of the family. Like, you could, I don't know, well, maybe it's conjecture to say this woman is taking so many business trips because of the grief that's really out there because we don't meet her, or that the daughter stays away. But it definitely affects this main character, the father, who, after coming home from work, he decides to pick up a six-pack, and he's like drinking through all of the beers, watching Die Hard, eating a steak, standing at the kitchen counter. And he had bought some paint to repaint his daughter's room, and decides there and then to start painting, which, it feels like, I don't know, the way this is all set up, it definitely feels like the decision of someone who, is getting a little tipsy, that, maybe you'd wait to talk to her first about the paint you bought or something like that, but instead, he's trying to feel useful and, to get this task done. So he starts painting a swath of the wall, and then that's when he hears the door, well, not a door click, I think it's the smash of a plate, and there's talk of how, well, he left the front door open, and he ultimately encounters these two boys who would have been about his son's age, which about now seems to be like, going into college, and they're wearing ski masks. And this is where, in a way, it's like, well, we're in the head of this grieving, drunk father who everything's slowed down, and his own inhibitions don't feel accurate to the scene. But also, we do get to learn that these two young men kind of knew the Ryan, the boy who died, like knew their way around the house, but maybe also say they weren't really friends. And I don't know, the whole thing after a little while, like, I'm not sure quite how I'm supposed to take it, because it doesn't feel tense the way a burglary should. It almost feels like these boys are part of his conscience. Like, not entirely. That's not accurate to say, but maybe it's more just the extreme confidence they have that he'll act the way he does. Like, that there's no impulse to, I mean, well, like in his head he talks about, well, I should, call the police, but like he's going like, oh, but that's not showing manliness to have to step away, or I can't step away from these boys. But these feel like reactions that you can't necessarily expect someone to feel, or to act on if their home is getting burgled. Like, it would feel like you would naturally, as a young boy who might be going for, I don't know, trying to go for expensive electronics or to put in the backpack or something, that you'd expect if someone were home that they'd, want to protect their stuff more than this narrator does. And it's questionable to me, I guess, how confident they are and how much they know this man. But this man's a middle-aged man. Like, how well do they actually know him, and that, so their confidence that he wouldn't react to, them burglaring the home when he's home. And anyway, I guess that kind of niggled at me a little, and it made it, I guess but so much of the story really is about this man and what's going on in his head, and the burglary, and like this semi, like it like escalates a little, the tension, as they go into Ryan's room, and he keeps telling them, well, we'll come into my room, I have money for you, and I don't know. There is some tension that ratchets up, and the boys are suddenly saying, well, we know Ryan actually wanted to do it, and it was suicide. And I don't know, it feels so personal in a way. It's like, and also it's been a few years, which, for the family doesn't have to mean much, but I'm kind of surprised these teenage boys are harping on it. I don't know. I guess, it's such a long, ruminative story that I guess I'm overthinking it too. And I feel like, the parts that have to do with the grief and the fracturing of this family are on point, but in a way, the burglary almost feels like, it's like outside of time. It almost feels like some sort of metaphor or something, but it is, in fact, the present action where he ultimately watches them, load up a couple of, it does ultimately seem like, stuff that could be easily replaced or something. And they go, like, stroll on down home afterwards, and he's watching them and watching the end of Die Hard, like, and hearing a phone ring, and is still very inactive, which feels apropos, I guess, to sort of the stymieing grief and drunkenness this main character is entrenched in. Next, I finished My Innocent Year by Daisy Alpert Florin. This was the book I picked for my Kayla's cover-a-thon, buzzword-a-thon pick for May. And this is a book that's supposed to be a bit, I guess, of a Bildungsroman, or a loss of innocence, but it takes place in the latter half of the main character's senior year, which was placed in 1998, in part so that the narrator, in fact, can look back, like, on the span of 20 years and occasionally speak from the future. But most of the action takes place in 1998. So we're following Isabel, and, she's in her last semester of college. She's an English major. She wants to be a writer. She kind of seems like she's part of, in a way, the snooty literary world, except that she has the bona fides of being, a poor member of this school called Wilder. She comes from New York, but the New York she comes from is the Lower East Side. Her father is a deli owner, except it's technically a different word, which I didn't actually know about, that there's a different word, because for Jewish delis, like, well, for all Jewish food, if you want to keep kosher, you have to split the meat and the milk, and so they're focusing on, like, the meatless items in this deli. But anyway, it gives, like, this sense of culture that almost feels outdated in 1998, and I guess it's supposed to, that, most Jews don't live like that in the Lower East Side by this point anymore, and even the Jews that, Daisy interacts with at school are different. And like, she has a roommate who is Jewish, and she's sort of this firebrand feminist of the time. It almost feels like a precursor to the sort of rage that's more, well, I guess maybe rage in feminism had its place in all sorts of times. But anyway, and she comes from a Jewish family, and is also dealing with, sort of a mental instability, which, might have, well, I'm going on a tangent here about a secondary character, which in and of itself might be commentary on, like, how easy it is to lean into sort of firebrand politics and the sort of stunts that this roommate, Deborah, pulls because of it. But anyway, the other main character who's Jewish that Isabel is interacting with is he's called Zev. He's Israeli, in fact. He's cocky, cocksure of himself. We open on him and Isabel like walking to his dorm and just sort of having I guess they're having a normal talk. They know each other decently well. And then they get to the dorm. She finds out by that point, actually, he has a girlfriend back home in Israel. But it seems obvious he's thinking when he's abroad he can play the field. And they start to, get a little frisky. But when they get to the point where the sex happens, I think it's one of those situations where, she kind of feels like she's going along with it and okay, this is fine. But then it gets to a point where, the sexual activity, is less enjoyable, and it feels, I guess a little bit invasive. And to me, this is one of the major commentaries of the book, I guess, but what happens next is she goes home to Deborah and says, well, I had a sexual encounter, but, it made me feel so icky. And Deborah immediately, jumps to, he raped you. And she has this, strong personality herself and, just says, if you didn't, like it, it's rape. If you did it when you didn't like what was happening, it's rape. And she's more conflicted, and it has to do, I think, with, I guess, the realities of, I just was, this was the impetus of me thinking about this, and the book thinks about it to a certain degree throughout the book as well, about, what constitutes, assault and what constitutes sexual relationships. Like, we're in this world, these teenagers, none of them are virgins waiting for marriage. Everybody has a sex drive, but it also feels like, especially in Isabel's case, because we're in her head, that she's not fully sure of herself, and that's how you kind of get into these situations. Like, I don't always want to go the 100% prude, direction in this, but it does feel like sometimes when you're new to sex and when you're new to relationships, it's hard to know what you want, and things can turn on a dime. Something that, you think starts one way doesn't end that way. And there's just also, I guess, something in here about, not knowing yourself fully, and maybe that's especially obvious when you're new to sex. Maybe you don't know completely 100% what you like, but I think it's just hard to be on the same page with people sometimes when sex, especially when you always have to, when you don't have, maybe it just comes down to how the generations that talk about explicitly being open about what you want, maybe they have the right of it, but obviously in this book, Isabel is never quite sure of what she wants, and that's, I suppose, the danger of saying, well, let's have sex when you don't quite know what you want. So anyway, getting back to the plot, Deborah decides to drag Isabel back to Zev's dorm. They write like rapist in spray paint on his board, so that fractures that relationship a bit, and then ultimately they're all called into the dean's office, but not a lot comes of it. Isabel is definitely not sitting there saying, I want to press charges, or something like that. So like they're saying, like the dean is saying awkwardly, well, this is a big, accusation to make. Maybe you want to talk to a counselor, and of course she doesn't. And so the story moves on from there, where it's, they're getting into their semester classes. Isabel has been invited into this particular English creative writing class, but the normal teacher, the dean of the English department, Joanna, won't be teaching it this year because she is going through a bitter divorce with another member of the English department, and that plays out as a very significant subplot. So there's this new teacher who's kind of a friend of them, who comes in as an adjunct. Connolly is his name, and he used to be a poet who had some standing, and then he wrote like a mainstream novel that kind of dashed his career, and now he mostly writes for the paper, for the newspaper, the local paper. And he comes in and he has sort of stereotypical, I think, literary professorial feelings and opinions, and he props Isabel and her stories up, even against Andy, who's another student she knows, who's the one that usually is the teacher's pet. So there's a little drama over there too, but obviously it makes Isabel feel special, and we fast forward to a holiday party where you really get to see the Joanna and her husband thing, you know, like up close and personal. And Connolly, who's also a married professor, you know, puts a little bit of the moves on Isabel, but she's pretty attracted to him by this point. She'd been secretly researching him, and they start a relationship, a sexual relationship. This is also very pointedly the time when Monica Lewinsky and that scandal is happening, so it's like more commentary on power imbalances and that sort of thing. But you know, Connolly is pretty like he, like, you know, tries very hard, like, to, you know, as they're ramping up the relationship, like he's the one who, like, you know, talks explicitly about consent. He's like, and I even know what happened with you and Zev. I want to make 100% sure that you know what's happening and that you want this as much as I do. And I guess, you know, I was thinking about it, and, you know, me being a middle-aged woman looking back on this, it does feel like Isabel feels lust, and, you know, she feels, and, you know, it's easy to feel attracted to someone with power who says, you know, your writing and what you want to do is important. But that they're not, but their relationship obviously isn't equal. They're not in the same place in their lives. He's married, you know, but, so those are my judgments, basically on the relationship. And you kind of know it's not going to end well, even though it's not something where he's being, you know, as fully manipulative, maybe as you'd think, and that, she's, you know, definitely an adult herself, but there's still a little bit of power imbalance, and he's still a little bit, just generally, of a questionable guy. You especially seem to see it come in with his relationship with Joanna's husband, Tom, who becomes more and more volatile and unstable in this relationship, and his part in that. And, you know, and it gets, like, we get to see a little bit into, like, who he is as a person ultimately, and just, you know, how maybe he's similar to Tom in that he resents his wife who has a better career than he does, and it just seems obvious. He is chasing girls, and he lies to her that she's the only one, and he's chasing girls to try to get back that high when he felt, you know, like a literary star himself. But I mean, still, most of this is about Isabel, and she is coasting through. She's hoping to have a literary career, but she's running against the reality that actually her father hasn't been able to afford her full education, and she will have to deal with debt that she's incurred and have to actually enter the workforce, heaven forbid. Although it does seem 20 years later she is lucky enough to, you know, have a literary career, and this whole book is definitely written from the people whose lives revolve around their literary careers, and it's her looking back on the experiences and the beliefs and how everything clashed together for her that final year of college, and what she used to think about adults, and what the like long string of experiences with, first with her and Zev and the affair with Connolly, and then the, you know, the drama that she sees firsthand with Joanna and Tom about how adults are fallible and how she takes that into her own adulthood. And it's sort of a rumination and sort of a goodbye to, I don't know, that purity of innocence, but the purity seems to be in, I don't know, it almost seems to be this purity that she's thinking back on is just ignorance. That she doesn't know much about the world as she thought she did, and she doesn't know as much about what she wants sexually or otherwise as she would have thought as well. And it's the painful part is, as an adult, realizing that she, you know, ultimately you do have to make decisions and move forward, even if, you know, it's never, none of the paths are quite, you know, shockingly, confidently clear. I mean, I liked this book as I read it. I thought that the characters were, you know, interesting enough. I thought I guess the themes and the plot was nuanced about these questions about growing up and culpability and how, you know, relationships work. Yeah, I'm glad I read it. Now I've started To Be a Jew Today, The New Guide to God, Israel, and the Jewish People by Noah Feldman, veering into nonfiction, very thick nonfiction. I'm reading it for a twofer reason. It's my maybe Midrash nonfiction pick, where I'm reading about religion this month. And then it's also a pick for my Synagogue's Israel Book Club, which actually was supposed to meet later this week, and I was going to try to speed through the rest of this, but our meeting just yesterday was postponed 2 weeks, which maybe is a little bit of relief. Part of me thinks, well, it'd be good to slow down with this book. It's a really thick book with a lot of heavy ideas in it. Although also I have so many things I want to read this month anyway that I should probably, I don't want to take too long on this either. Just like delineated into parts. I know the big Israel part is coming soon, but I'm in part 1, which in a lot of ways is about religious practice in and of itself, but it's broader than that, because I think a lot of Jews who practice religion, it's not just about rituals. It really is like, you know, a more all-encompassing life, you know, purpose, especially for people who are more traditionalists. Like, the more you're involved and you live in a Jewish community that, you know, exists beyond the synagogue, it's really a larger part of you believing in God and a specific sort of morality. But he's trying to be a little bit bigger than just saying, well, here's how Orthodox live and here's how non-Orthodox live. He gets into his own delineations about traditionalists and progressives and evolutionists who are kind of trying to meld the two, because progressivism is sort of like its own religion, like where like the moral givens, instead of being what God passed down from Sinai and what's, you know, been written in the religious books, it's more the givens are the precepts of progressive thought on equality and that sort of thing, and the evolutionaries are kind of trying to meld the two. So yeah, there's a lot of thick thought in this book. I hope I really do want to find the time to, you know, take it all in, because I really was looking forward to the conversation, and I still am, with the Synagogue Book Club, because I feel like this is probably going to be more content than maybe is worth it to really digest alone, especially Jewish content, because we believe in text studying groups anyway, in Chavruta groups, we call them. So I'm looking forward to it, but yeah, I hope to report back soon to have this book finished by my next damn reading video. Because my other big obligation this month is finishing my BookTube prize reading, and as such I'm currently reading Undue Burden, Life and Death Decisions in Post-War America, which is about this author, Shefali Luthra, is chronicling different states and different case studies of people trying to seek abortions, and the reality state by state, like leading up to the dissolution of Roe and then afterwards, and just what that landscape looks like now, where it's a lot more difficult, especially in conservative states, to get abortions. So this is part of my BookTube Prize reading. The BookTube Prize was started by Robert Sheard back in 2019 as a way for the literary book community to judge the best in literary fiction and nonfiction published in English the year before. So we're currently reading 2024 releases. We start with long lists of 48 books per division, and we whittle them down in 4 rounds until we get to, you know, winners and runners-up. And we're currently in the second of the 4 rounds, the quarterfinals, which the ballots are due shortly before the end of the month. And I'll have to judge this book compared to 5 others in my ballot, which is Group D of nonfiction. And that's all I can say about it now. I'm zipping my lips, not giving any thoughts. I did give some preliminary thoughts before I started reading any of these books on the ballot, and that video and more information to the BookTube Prize is linked down below. So that about covers it for me now. I think time is getting away from me more than I thought, because I'm going with my dad to this appointment, and he just called me, and I have to call him back, and I have to take a shower and get out of here. And in the meantime, I hope to get back on some sort of track with my BookTube schedule. Last weekend, a few days ago, I went to the Gaithersburg Book Festival, a local book festival to me. I'm so excited, and I have some footage and some things to say about that, so hopefully I'll get that video up soon. Stay tuned. In the meantime, there's also construction going on outside, and the day is continuing on, and I hope your day is going well. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.